Today is August 11th, 2009. I am at the local VFW post in Montville, New Jersey, interviewing Mr. Joseph Quade. Mr. Quade was born on August 22nd, 1923. He served in World War II in the 17th Airborne?
17th Airborne.
In the 17th Airborne Division. He was a private first class, and he served both stateside and in the European theater. Thank you very much for coming from the tree today, Mr. Quade.
Thanks for inviting me.
Mr. Quade, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted in June of 1943. I was attending Rutgers. I was in my sophomore year at Rutgers, and ever since January of that year, we all knew we were going into service, and things were hectic at college. And around May 10th, I got my draft notice and told to report on June 14th at the Elizabeth Armory. June 14th was Flag Day, so I can always remember the fact that I went into service on Flag Day.
So because you were drafted, were you allowed to pick the service branch that you joined, or?
No, at that time I was drafted by the Army, and wasn't given any choice.
Do you remember your first days in the service?
Well, first we reported to the railway station in Elizabeth. There were about 30 of us, and a short ride down to Fort Dix. Of course, we went through the normal routine then of turning in our clothes. They gave us Army uniforms, and we were there for about 3 days. I was 19 at the time, and I didn't drink, but several of the older fellows went to the PX, and I guess one of my first Army memories was having a beer at the one of the PXs at Fort Dix.
Do you remember your training experiences or boot camp?
Well, I was at Fort Dix for, I'd say, for about 3 days, and then we got on a train that took us from Fort Dix down to Tyler, Texas, where Camp Fannin was the training camp for, they called the BIRTC, Basic Infantry Replacement Training Center. And we were there, I was there for 13 weeks, and we went through basic infantry training. There were several thousand young fellows like myself down there. Fortunately or unfortunately, there were about a half a dozen with whom I graduated from high school. So I did have some friends when I got there, but it wasn't long before I made friends with other draftees from all over the United States, California, Texas, Florida, Chicago, New York. And it was a tough 13 weeks of training. We had a sergeant by the name of Sergeant Kamatsuka. He was a Japanese soldier, and it was rather surprising. Here we were fighting the Japanese, and yet we had a Japanese sergeant. I remember him well. He was a little short guy, but tough and fair, and it was quite an experience training down there.
So you were a member of the Air. How did you get involved with the Airborne Division?
Well, after we finished the basic training, for one reason or another, I was selected to go into a special program called ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program. This was a program that had been set up by the Army to train selected soldiers in certain fields, languages, engineering, medical, etc. And I was lucky enough to be sent up to Boston or Cambridge, Mass. To MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I was there for 6 months from October of 43 until March of 45, when the program was abruptly terminated because they had so many losses overseas, excuse me, that they needed more basic infantry soldiers. And since I had basic infantry training, the program, when the program was terminated, we were then, those of us who were at this college and colleges all over the United States, we were assigned basically to infantry outfits. My outfit wasn't a true infantry outfit, it was an airborne infantry. And that's how I got assigned to the 17th Airborne Division.
What was your group working on at MIT?
Well, I was in the engineering curriculum, and I don't know what they planned to do after we finished. It was supposed to be a whole year of training, and I believe their plan was to send us into OCS and become second lieutenants. Exactly what they planned to do with us then, I don't know, but we never finished, so we never found out.
So you were doing engineering training?
At the school we took English, and we took history, we took drafting, we took certain physics and chemistry courses. In the early first 6 months, I guess we were sort of taking general courses, and maybe later on we would have taken more specific engineering courses. But it was a break from infantry training and being stationed at near Boston. It was a pretty good deal for us.
How did you feel when you were reassigned to the Airborne Division after spending such a nice time at MIT?
Well, we were in the Army to be soldiers and not really students, so it wasn't too much of a shock when they stopped the program and sent us to the infantry outfit. Mm-hmm. Airborne was different. I knew nothing at all about airborne. I knew there were paratroopers, but I had no idea that we'd be assigned to a airborne outfit, and that was quite a shock to find out that I was going to be airborne rather than basic infantry.
How did you train for the airborne?
A big pardon?
How did you train for the airborne division? Did you have to go through more training?
Airborne training was tough. You had to be in good physical shape, and one of the basic fundamental rules of being an airborne, you never walked, you ran. So we would run to breakfast, we'd run to training, we'd run and do a lot of calisthenics, a lot of training that put us in physically in very good shape. I remember one of the training exercises we had was to be out in the field and pretend that they said a tank is coming. Dig your foxhole and get way down the bottom of your foxhole, because the tanks are going to ride right over your foxhole. And that was quite a scary episode. The tanks came, but they never ran over. They stopped short of the foxholes, but they really scared us at that point.
What was your specific assignment?
Well, when I was first assigned to the 17th Airborne, I was assigned to the glider troops. During World War II, gliders were a means of getting troops behind enemy lines. The glider was towed by a propeller plane, a C-47. When they got near the enemy grounds, the glider separated from the 747 and came in and glided into the ground behind enemy lines. we went up a few times in the glider just to see how it was like. That's why we were training. And then I had the opportunity, they asked for volunteers who wanted to go into the paratroops. So for whatever reason, I can't recall why, other than the fact that we were being paid $50 a month at the time, and if you joined the paratroops, you got an extra 50. So I signed up for the paratroops, and a few days later, in I think it was in April, I was transferred from the glider troops to the paratroops. The training for the paratroops was tough generally, but we were at Camp Forest, Tennessee at the time, and we were not down at the home of the training ground of the paratroops. That was down in Fort Benning, Georgia. We were not down there, so we had those of us who were transferred from the gliders to the paratroops, and only about, I think, 50 of us who were so transferred. We went through a very brief training that was learning how to land when you hit the ground, learning obviously how to exit the plane. These weren't free fall jumps, these were static line jumps. You had a static line, or a line from the back of your parachute to a cord, steel cord that went the length of the plane. You're hooked up on the cord, and when you jump, when you got about 30 feet out of the plane, you pull the pack off the parachute, and your parachute opened. So we had to make 5 jumps to qualify, 4 daytime jumps and 1 night jump. And I still remember my first jump. We were at about 1,200 or 1,500 feet. We jumped, and I hit the ground and landed just so soft. It was just like I was stepping off a curb. It was a very, very easy jump. So I couldn't wait to make the next jump. And the next jump, or the next day, it was quite different. I hit the ground very hard. Felt like my hip bones were coming up around my ears, but I survived, and then we made 2 more daytime jumps, and we qualified on the 5th day by making a nighttime jump. And that's a little scary. You're up in the air, about 1,500 feet up in the air. You look down, you can't see a thing on the ground. Everything is pitch black, and lined up in the plane, and they said, okay, line up, and then we sounded off for equipment check and did the various routine, and they said jump, and you jump out, and it's just like jumping in a void, very black and nothing there. However, there was a red light and a green light on each end of the field, and they were supposed to assemble at the green light. So we hit the ground, and it was over, and a couple of days later we had a formation, and they pinned our parachute wings on us. So that was my introduction into the paratroops. And I was assigned, I was selected and assigned to what was called the Parachute Maintenance Division. And the function of that particular division, not division, the Parachute Maintenance Company. And the purpose, the role and operation of the company was to pack the parachutes, maintain the parachutes, preparatory for jumping, and we worked 12 hours a day packing it, actually the parachutes and the reserve parachutes, and we also trained more of the glider troops as they came into the paratroops. But my primary function during the rest of the war was in the Parachute Maintenance Company.
Do you, where exactly, so you served in World War II? You served in World War II, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I served in World War II from June of 43 until Christmas Eve of 1945 when I came home.
Where in Europe were you stationed?
Well, we left New York in August of 1944, on a ship called the USS Wakefield. It had been a luxury cruiser before the war, and there were 12,000 of us aboard the ship. The whole division was aboard the ship. We took about 7 days to get over to Europe. We landed at Southampton and took a train up to Liverpool and then back down to Winchester, which was in the southern part of England, and we were stationed there for about 4 months, from August to December. Did our job there, did some additional infantry training, and our primary purpose, as I said before, was to pack parachutes and get the equipment ready for the eventual jump by the company.
And then after being stationed in England, where did you?
Well, in December of 1945, the Germans started a large operation called the Battle of the Bulge.
44.
Yeah, I'm sorry. December of 1944, the Germans started what was called the Battle of the Bulge, and the 17th Airborne Division was still stationed in England, and at the time we got word, it was 2 days before Christmas, we got word that we were going to ship over to France and join in the fighting over there. So it was on Christmas Eve that we were all lined up and got in the planes, and they took us over to France. I don't recall the town that we were landed at, but we were then quartered for a short time in some barracks, and then the division, including the parachute maintenance company, saw their first combat in the Battle of the Bulge around January 7th, 1945. We had that was a tough day because we had quite a heavy loss. The division had over 700 killed in the first 2 days of battle over in Belgium and Luxembourg.
Do you have any particular memorable experiences from the Battle of the Bulge?
Well, it was cold. Those who have studied history know that they say it was one of the coldest days in Belgium, Luxembourg, and France, the coldest for many, many, many years. It was cold, there was a light snow, and as days went on, the snow became much deeper. We didn't have proper equipment. Fortunately, being in the parachutes, we did have boots, and the boots kept our feet reasonably dry. But before long, when you're trudging through snow all day, your boots even became water soaked. And, many of the troops suffered frozen feet, frozen toes, and some of them had to be evacuated back to England because the thing was so severe. I was lucky, lucky in some ways, because the parachute maintenance company stayed in combat only for about 10 days, while the rest of the division was in combat for almost a full month. So we, parachute maintenance company members, were removed from combat briefly, and we were sent to a town called Chalon-sur-Marne in France, where we were housed in an old granary, which had adequate facility for us to get the parachutes ready for what was coming up later on.
So after the Battle of the Bulge, what else? What other battles or campaigns did you participate in?
Well, okay. After the Battle of the Bulge, which ended early in February, and which was one of the greatest, most savage battles of the war. Excuse me. Our division lost quite a few men there. we were back in Chalon-sur-Marne, and it was our job then to make sure that the parachutes are ready, because they had in mind that our division would be one of the first to cross the Rhine River into Germany. So we spent 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, getting the chutes and all the other equipment ready. And then on March 24th, 1945, 17th Airborne Division parachuted across the Rhine River into a town called Wesel, W-E-S-E-L. Parachute Maintenance Company also parachuted in across the Rhine, and one of our special duties was to see how many parachutes and equipment we could salvage. But after we did some initial fighting, we went back to the area where we had parachuted in and found out that the German women in that area had confiscated most of the parachutes, and they were silk, some nylon with silk, and whatever they did with them, I guess they found good use for them. But we fought, the parachute maintenance men fought for about 2 weeks, and then we went back to Chalon-sur-Marne. The division fought for April until the 6th of May, when the war was over. They went through such towns as Essen and Düsseldorf and some of the large industrial towns in the Rhine area. The war was over, as I say, on May 7th. And we went into occupation duty at that time in Germany. The division was split up in June of 1945, and the men from the division were transferred either to the 82nd Airborne Division or the 101st Airborne Division or the 13th Airborne Division. During World War II, there were 4 airborne divisions. The 82nd and 101st fought on D-Day and had a very distinguished wartime career. The 17th had 2 major campaigns. That was the Battle of the Bulge and the Operation Varsity crossing the Rhine River. The 13th Airborne, which came over later on, I think they came over Europe in December of 44. They were alerted several times to make a parachute jump. The latest one was they were going to parachute into Berlin, and then the decision was changed that the Russians would take Berlin. So, as I say, the 17th was broken up, and the men were transferred either to the 82nd, which eventually went to Berlin on occupation duty, or the 101st, which was on occupation duty on Austria, or the 17th, or the 13th, or the 13th. I was assigned, along with many of my friends from the Parachute Maintenance Company, to the 13th Airborne, and we left Europe in August 15th, I believe, August 8th, I believe, of 1945, in preparation of going home, having a 45-day leave, and then going out to California and going out to the South Pacific, where we were going to join the troops that were out there in the invasion of Japan. Fortunately, we were aboard ship halfway home when the Truman arranged to have the atom bomb dropped on Japan, and the Japanese surrendered. And so when we did get home, we were not sent to the Pacific. I was sent to Fort Bragg. I was there for a couple of weeks, went home for a 45-day leave, and then was discharged. I got home on Christmas Eve of 1945.
How did it feel being one of the first troops to cross the Rhine River?
Well, we knew we were going to cross the Rhine River, but we didn't know the significance of it. Or at least I didn't know the significance of it. I was 19 years old. I didn't know. Well, I was 20 years old at the time, and I didn't know too much about the philosophy of the war. We knew the Rhine River. We knew that was the river that separated the Allies from Germany. We did what we were told, and when we were told we were going to cross the Rhine, well, we said, okay, we're going to cross the Rhine. We didn't realize that the Germans were, after we hit the ground, they were still shooting at us, of course, but it wasn't too long after that they started a retreat, and many of the Germans started to give up to the Americans. They didn't want to get captured by the Russians. The Russians were coming from the east towards Germany, so we got a lot of POWs. As far as the political aspect of the war, as a PFC and as one who really didn't know too much of what was going on, we did what we were told.
Did you, before the parachute, before jumping, especially before jumping out into battle, did you feel nervous or excited? Did you look forward to jumping, or did you?
Well, I had made my 5 initial jumps, and I made several others in practice. The parachuting never became commonplace. When you're jumping out of a plane, whether it's 1,000 feet or 600 feet, as we did in Germany in Operation Varsity, it's still a challenge. You're jumping out, jumping out of a perfectly good plane. Of course, you hope your parachute would open. There were very few parachutes. There was very few problems with parachutes not opening. I think probably less than 1 out of every 10,000 had a problem. But when we knew we were going to jump into Germany, we were told to pack our stuff. We didn't take much with us. Most of our equipment, we had a rifle, we had our regular parachute, we had our reserve parachute, we had what was called a musette bag, which you had maybe a change of underwear, you had your toothbrush, you had your soap, you had some of your rations. The night before, we spent time packing that. There wasn't much to do in packing that, and the next morning we got up around 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and we had an excellent breakfast. We had a steak breakfast. They were able to give steaks to some of us anyhow, and we marched out to the plains, and we were scared, and had heard on the radio, I think the woman was called Actress Sally. She was an American who had deflected to the Germans, and we heard her on the radio saying, "You won't need your parachute because the flak, the armament shooting by the German will be so heavy you can walk down on that." Well, that was a joke, of course, but for some reason, most of us were concerned and we were scared, but not in an unusual amount.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
No, I wasn't a hero. I didn't. I got the Bronze Star, which was the primary medal for doing a little bit more than your job. I think the greatest medal or award that I got was when I was awarded my parachute wings, because I never thought when I went into service that I was going to join a prestige outfit like the parachutes. My brother was in the Marines. My twin brother was in the Marines in the Pacific, and he went to Scout Sniper School. He got several awards. He got wounded twice over there, and he was more of a hero than I was. I was just a regular GI doing a job.
How did you keep in touch with your family? Particularly, how did you keep in touch with your brother?
I didn't keep in touch with my brother too much. I used to write to my family maybe once a week, and that was on what was then called V-mail. You'd write on a sheet of paper that was 8.5 by 11, and they had a system whereby they photoed the paper and folded it so it was less bulky. They could send a lot more of them home, and I kept in touch with my family that way. I did get letters also from my relatives and from friends. We had pretty good mail service over there, so maybe sometimes you wouldn't get mail for a week or two, but we kept in touch, well, strictly through mail. No telephones or anything like that.
This is the wrong question to ask you because I have a twin sister. More than an interview question. How did it feel having a twin brother who was in the Pacific at the time? Or?
Well, we were close, but not that close. We were
Yeah.
close when we were much younger, but when we went to high school, we weren't. He had different friends than I did, and we were close. But he left Rutgers. He was at Rutgers also, but he volunteered to go into service in March of '43. I didn't go until June. He volunteered, signed up for the Marines, and let's say went to the Special Scout Sniper School, and was sent over to the South Pacific in early 1944, where he fought in Guadalcanal and several other battles over there. He was slightly wounded first time, and then more seriously wounded the second time. Well, I was proud of him, but we hadn't been in touch. We hadn't been in touch physically in touch with one another for almost a year and a half. When I came home in August of '45, he was in a hospital in Bayonne, a naval hospital in Bayonne. Not in a serious condition, but he was recuperating there. And he got discharged from the service in September. I was back at Fort Bragg at the time. He got discharged in September and went to Florida. So I really didn't see much of him. And unfortunately, he was killed in an auto accident in 2 years later, in August of '47. So our lives were shattered at the time.
The next segment of questions is dealing with your life at in the service, especially dealing with daily life amid battlefield conditions. So, did you feel like you had plenty of supplies, or did you feel like you were short on supplies?
I don't think that we were short of supplies. The only time I think that I personally and those with me were short of supplies was during the Battle of the Bulge, when we really didn't have adequate clothing to combat, not the enemy either, but to combat the weather. It was cold, it was snowy, and it was a dismal experience. I think that we were lucky if we had an extra pair of dry socks which you put on. Hope the other pair would dry up before this current one got soaked. But I think our division was, I wouldn't say we were lucky, but I think we were well supplied. We had a good supply organization. I think they kept us well supplied. As far as food went, if you want me to talk about food for a minute, I'm a meat and potato eater, and I won't say I enjoyed the military food, but I had no complaints about it. The eggs were not fresh eggs, they were powdered eggs. The coffee was not the best, but I think they, both in the States and overseas, I think that we got fed reasonably well. And
Sorry.
I had no complaints about the food.
Sorry about that. Did you feel any pressure or stress?
Well, not being in good physical shape when I went in the service, there was stress when we had to, do a lot of exercise, calisthenics. We had a 25-mile march, and it was tough to complete that. But when I finished basic training and when I went in and joined the airborne outfit, I was in pretty good shape. And I think that that was one of the benefits of being in the service. It took me from not being physically in shape to being in pretty good shape. That was probably the only stress that I can remember.
How did you and your fellows, how did you entertain yourselves?
Well, when we were in the States, drinking beer was probably one of the biggest entertainments. And dances, I didn't really do much as far as dancing went, and going to parties like that. But in the States, we'd go to town, we'd get on a bus or a GI truck, and we'd go to one of the towns in Texas, be it Gladewater or one of the Tyler, one of the towns, and we'd walk around and just visit around. Occasionally we get invited to go home for Sunday dinner from some of the local people. Movies, if the town had a movie. Overseas it was different. In England, after work at around 5 o'clock, after having dinner around 6 o'clock at night, we'd get into one of the 6x6 trucks and go down to either the town of Winchester or the town of Eastleigh, down in southern England, and we'd go to a local dance or go to a local bar. France and Germany, there wasn't that much to do. We didn't have much time off anyhow over there. But movies and local bars were, I think, we did see some USO entertainment. I saw Mickey Rooney over there, and I also saw Marlena Dietrich in the USO show. That was, and if you played cards, there were a lot of card games. They played a lot of cards. I didn't play cards, so I didn't join that.
Would you guys perhaps play pranks on the other officers, not the officers, on your other soldiers, or how do you feel the atmosphere? Was it a lighthearted atmosphere, or?
Well, I had a lot of friends. I think to answer your question indirectly, I had a lot of friends, made a lot of friends from all over the United States. And that was, I think, probably one of the indirect benefits of being in the service. I can talk, if you like, about my affiliation with the Airborne after. We got out of the service in 1945. I got out, as I said, Christmas Eve of 45, and then 1954, a number of us, it was 9 years we were out of the service, many of them were married, had families, were working. Several of us got together and decided that we ought to form an association to keep in touch with those with whom we served. So we formed the 17th Airborne Division Association. We had our first meeting in Pittsburgh in August of '54. About 60 of us from the airborne got together. And don't forget, in the division there were 12,000. We lost by being killed during the war. We lost 1,400 of us, but there were 12,000 in the division. Our first get-together was in Pittsburgh. We had about 60 of us there, and from that we then have had a reunion every year since then. Our last reunion was 2 years ago when we decided the division association would fold up. But we had 54 reunions all over the United States, and we've had as many as 1,000 at our reunions. And I'm proud to say that I'm past president of the association. I was editor of its publication for 45 years, and I still am very active in our alumni group. I'm pleased that I have friends all over the United States, California, Texas, and almost every one of the 50 states. I have a friend who I made friends with during the war. So it was an experience which I would never have had otherwise, but to have a fellow, a doctor down in Georgia, a fellow was a steel worker in Cleveland, Ohio, pharmacist out in California. It's just been a real post-war pleasure to have had the opportunity to make friends all over the United States.
After the war ended, did you go back to Rutgers, or did you get a job after you were discharged?
After the war, when I came home, I went back to Rutgers and finished, since I had 2 years of Rutgers before the war, and I got credit for my time at MIT. I was able to graduate in another year. I graduated from Rutgers in June of '47, and since I had some GI Bill left, I then went up to Cornell in Ithaca, where I got my master's degree in 2 years. And funny how I started my career. I wanted to go back to Europe the summer of '49 when I graduated from Cornell. I was interviewed by several companies, and one of them was Prudential. I told them, Prudential Insurance Company, I told them that I would like to start in September. They said, fine, that's okay. So I spent the summer summer of '49 in Europe. And then I went to work for Prudential and stayed with them for 37 years, retiring at age 62 in 1985. That's my career. I've had several careers since then. Should I mention them to you?
Sure.
Okay. I don't want to take up all the time here, but since I was active in the 17th Airborne Division Association in 1968, they said, gee, we ought to go back to visit where we fought. So at that time I arranged for a trip to go back to England, France, Belgium, and Germany where we fought, and I took 110, 60 or 70 troopers plus their wives or spouses or friends. We went back and visited the places that we had trained and fought in Europe. Subsequent to that, I formed my own travel company and took members of the 17th and other airborne outfits all over the world to Japan and China and New Zealand and Australia and Russia, and for about 5 years I took groups back all over the world. That was a fun experience.
How did it feel visiting the places in Europe that you fought?
Well, I can say that the people over in Europe certainly are still appreciative, at least the ones that I met, are very appreciative of what the American GI did during the war, liberating them. I've got some very good friends in England, in Holland, in Belgium, Luxembourg, and even made friends with some of the German paratroopers who were fighting against us during the war. So it's been my life has been very fortunate in having been able to make friends, not only with those with whom I served, but those who we liberated, as well as those who fought against us.
How do you've made friends with German paratroopers?
That's an interesting story. When we knew we were going in '68, in '68, I made a preliminary trip over there to do some planning, and I met with the mayor of the town of Basel where we had parachuted in, and I told him we were coming over there in a couple of months. Could he arrange to see if any of the German paratroopers were stationed or lived in that town? So we got over there, and our destination was to meet in town hall. So I had about 40 paratroopers with me, and we went to town hall, and we see these fellows standing in the main lobby, dressed like businessmen, dark suits, neckties, looked like they were bankers. Turned out that they were the German paratroopers from 25 years ago. And I always remember that one of them made a little speech, and he said, 25 years ago, he said, we were shooting at one another with the rifles, and now we're shooting at one another with cameras. So it was an emotional meeting with the German paratroopers, and it was something unusual. And we met, as I say, we met later on. I've taken the troops over, and we met with the Russians. We even met with the Japanese paratroopers. So it's like a big fraternity.
How do you feel like your service and your experiences have affected your life?
Well, I think that I don't play golf. I don't hang out in the bars. I don't play cards. And I think that the airborne military has affected my life because, as I say, I've attended all 54 of the 17th Airborne reunions. I've been editor of their publication for 45 years. I was president of the association, member of the board of directors, and I've taken groups to all the places in the world where we met with paratroopers. So I think it's played a major role in my life for the last 60-some years.
Has your military experience influenced your outlook on life, or like your feelings about current events or political events of the time or anything?
Well, I was concerned, World War II was over in 1945, and in 1950 we went to the Korean War. And then in 1960 something, we went to the Vietnam War. I didn't join up, I didn't participate, but I was certainly concerned about the young fellows who were then serving. And I joined the American Legion, I joined the VFW, and over the years we have tried to do whatever we could to make it a little easier for those who are in the service. VFW here has been very active in seeing that we can do whatever we can for those who are serving now.
Is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't covered so far?
I think I've talked quite enough now. I want to thank you for the opportunity, become part of the archives down in the Library of Congress. Who knows in the future, the experiences I've had may be of interest to historians, and if so, I'm proud to have had this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.